Hi, welcome to today's video. My name is Paul. So this week I actually got a chance to do a bit of watercolor painting. It's really the first watercolor painting I've done for a few months. I think I did one watercolor painting back in December or so, but really since last October I haven't done very much watercolor painting. I've been focusing on the charcoal drawings, which I love doing, so that's fine. It's just nice to have a chance to do something a little bit different again. So the way things work for me at the moment, my sort of setup, I'm in a shared house. It's not my house, and I only have a small personal space, just the one bedroom. Now the bedroom has a desk, and that's where I do most of my charcoal drawings. I don't do watercolor painting there because I'm always worried about spilling paint or knocking over a jar of water or something, and I don't want to make a mess of this room, so, or any more of a mess than it already is. But it means that the painting that I do, the watercolor painting, acrylic painting, things like that, I use a different space for that. The space is fine. Again, it's quite a small space, but it works fine for me. The only one problem it has is there's no heating and there's not much insulation. So in wintertime, painting becomes a bit of an endurance challenge as well, because it really does get quite cold in there. So it's a case of lots of layers of clothes, really. I find I can do about 1 hour of painting, and then my hands are just so cold that it just doesn't work anymore. But anyway, these are the excuses that I use to not do the watercolor painting, or not as much as I should, really, or I would like to. But as I say, this week I did get the chance to do a little bit. I did 3 paintings, but only 2 of them are in this video. The third one, unfortunately, the battery and the camcorder ran out, so I didn't get to record that third one. The paintings themselves, I tried to keep everything very simple, very open composition. As I've said before, using a very limited color palette. And as I said before, I try to use that limited color palette because I think it helps to give a bit more harmony to the final painting, maybe. You know, in composition they have this idea of harmony. If you're using colors that sort of work together and don't clash with each other, it can give quite a peaceful sort of final painting. Now you don't have to do it that way. You can have clashing colors like reds and greens and things. It really depends on, it's not as though this is right and that's wrong. It depends really on what your goal for the painting is. Do you want something that's sort of quiet and peaceful, or do you want something more exciting? That's my idea anyway about how to choose what colors to use in a painting. Unlike a lot of people, as I've said before again many times, I'm not a naturalistic painter, so I will use colors that are not necessarily realistic. That's not my goal. My goal is to create an artistic impression of a landscape rather than reproduce a photographic-like representation of a landscape. Every week I produce a little art newsletter. It's nothing very exciting, but I make it available to the people who support me on Patreon. And in that newsletter this week, I just mentioned sort of 5 or 6, I think I called them principles, but that sounds a bit grandiose. Maybe 5 or 6 ideas that I try to base most of my paintings and drawings on. These ideas. And these ideas are not set in stone. They're not something that I always have to obey. they're open to interpretation, and they can change over time, and they have changed over time. But the idea is, if I just go through them, the first one is very much these days keeping things minimal. So if I use a color, if I put a mark on the piece of paper, I kind of have to justify why I'm doing it. I don't want to just cover the entire paper with color just for the sake of covering the paper, if that makes sense. Just trying to keep things sort of minimal. And every mark and every brush mark that I put on the paper, I want it to try and be expressive, to be interesting to look at. Again, not just for the sake of covering the paper, covering up the white paper, but everything should be more expressive and more interesting. Now that's especially true with the charcoal drawing. With watercolor, things are a little bit different, because you're kind of, watercolor painting is not like, say, acrylic painting or oil painting, where you do get these expressive marks. Watercolor painting can sometimes be a bit more just staining the paper with color. It's a little bit different. But another thing, the third one, is not to be too precious with each medium. And what I mean is, when I first got started with watercolor, I watched a lot of YouTube videos, read a lot of blogs and things, and a lot of, well, not a lot, some people were kind of suggesting that if you, for example, if you use gouache in a watercolor painting, it's not a true watercolor painting. It's this sort of being a bit precious about the idea of what a watercolor painting should be. And I want to get away from that idea. It's an idea I sort of picked up on in the early days, and I now want to reject the idea. I'm more into using mixed media. Mixed media is fine, and I don't describe myself as a watercolorist. I use watercolor, but I'm not a purist watercolor painter. The next one then is, again, I've mentioned this many times, but I'm not a naturalistic painter. I'm not trying to capture every detail in a landscape. I just want to get the essence of a landscape. And then the last one is to keep experimenting and always trying different things. So those are the, how many was that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different ideas that I kind of try to use when I'm painting and drawing. And I say, these ideas are not set in stone. They will change all the time. Some of them will disappear, new ones will come in. But I think it's maybe a good idea just to have a few ideas set out, so that, you know, it's this idea of developing your own unique style as well. If you have some ideas that sort of underpin your style, it might help just to develop it. Anyway, those are the two scans, the two final paintings. I think they're quite open to interpretation. The top one, it could be a beach, if you want to see it as a beach. It could be a field with some sort of crop growing in it. Maybe if I was going to add another idea to this list of 5, it would be, it's okay to keep a painting sort of open to interpretation and let the viewer decide what they want to see in the painting. Keeping things a little bit abstract like that, I think that's okay. I don't think that's a bad idea. Sometimes you don't always have to spoon feed the viewer. You can let them interpret things a little bit in their own way. So maybe I'll add that to my list of ideas. Anyway, if you made it this far in the video, thank you for watching, and hopefully see you in next week's video.